On the 9th night, in a whiteout north of Thompson, a creature that was not on any biologist's list stepped out of a stand of black spruce 8 feet from where I was standing, and I raised a Remington 700 to my shoulder, and I did not fire. I have replayed that decision every day for 22 years. I was a competent shot. My uncle had trained me since I was 10. The safety was already off. The animal, I'll call it an animal for now, we can argue about the word later, was close enough that I could see individual strands of frozen hair on its forearm and the crust of old blood on its jaw. My uncle was on the ground 3 feet to my left, either dead or in the process of dying. Marcus Beauchamp was on his back in the snow behind me, screaming a word I did not recognize. The lantern was still burning on the crate by the tent. I remember all of it in a kind of clarity that I do not have for any other moment in my life, before or since, and I did not fire. I want you to understand that this is not a story about a man who froze. I have thought about that possibility, and I have rejected it. I did not freeze. My finger was on the trigger. My breathing was steady. Ray had drilled that into me 1,000 times, and it held. I was ready to shoot, and I chose not to, and I do not know why I made that choice, except that when the creature turned its head and looked at me, something in its face was familiar in a way that I still cannot explain in words. I'm going to try tonight. There are 3 things about that hunt I have never told anyone. This is one of them. The other 2 I'll take with me, because there's a boy asleep in the next room who's 9 years old, and I have not decided yet what he needs to know and what he needs to be protected from. My name is Jake Delacroix. I was 28 years old in November of 2003. I worked at the paper mill in the Pas, Manitoba. My Uncle Ray was the closest thing to a father I ever had, and this is the story of the hunt that killed him. The call came on a Tuesday in the last week of October. I remember because I was pulling a double at the mill, and Ray never called during a shift unless somebody had died. He called anyway. He said Marcus Beauchamp had a tag left and a cabin dropped, and that the 2 of them were going up for 10 days, and that they wanted me along. I said no first. I said no because I had just started dating a woman named Lisa, who would later become my wife, and because I had 2 weeks of leave banked, and I'd been thinking about spending them warm. Ray did not press me. Ray never pressed anyone. He said, "Think about it, kid. It's a good tag." And he hung up. He called back on Thursday. This is the part I keep coming back to, because it was the only time in 20 years I ever heard my uncle ask me for anything. He said, "Jake, I want you to come." That was it. That was the whole request. And I said yes, and I did not ask him why, and I have carried that unasked question for 22 years like a stone in my coat pocket. Ray was 56 years old that fall. He was my mother's older brother, and he had raised me from the age of 6 after my father left, which is a sentence I say without any drama, because there's no drama left in it. My father was a mill hand from Flin Flon, who did not want the life he had, and one morning he made a decision about that, and after that we did not see him. Ray moved into the spare room of our house in the Pas within a month. He did not marry my mother. He was not that kind of uncle. He was the kind who put a rifle in my hands when I was 10 and taught me how to breathe with it, and who signed my report cards, and who drove me to the hospital in Winnipeg the summer I broke my arm falling out of a jack pine. He did not talk much. He did not need to. He was the most watched and not watching man I have ever known, which is to say, he saw everything and reacted to almost none of it. Marcus Beauchamp was Ray's oldest friend. They had trapped together in the 70s out of a shared line north of Cranberry Portage, back when a young man could still make a living at it if he was willing to be cold for 8 months a year. Marcus was Métis on his mother's side and French on his father's, and he had the kind of face that looked carved rather than grown. He was a big man, bigger than Ray. He laughed loud and drank quiet, which is the reverse of most men I have known, and he had a wife named Denise and 2 grown daughters in Winnipeg, who he called every Sunday from a payphone in whatever town he was working out of. He was 58 that fall. He and Ray had hunted together every November for 31 years, and I had been with them 3 of those years, and I was still the junior man in every way that mattered. I drove up from the Pas to Thompson on the 12th of November in a 1994 GMC pickup that Ray had sold me 2 years before for the price of a good rifle. The truck did not have a working heater on the driver's side, and I had wrapped a wool blanket around my legs the whole way. It took me 9 hours. I got in after dark, and I slept on the couch at Ray's cousin's place on Selkirk Avenue, and in the morning we drove out to the strip at Paint Lake, where Dennis Kirby was going to fly us in. Dennis was a bush pilot who had known Ray since before I was born. He flew a Cessna 185 on floats in summer and skis in winter, and he ran a one-man charter out of a hangar that smelled of avgas and coffee and old tobacco. He was a small man, wiry, with a face like a piece of driftwood. And when I walked into his hangar behind Ray and Marcus that morning, he looked up from a chart he was folding, and his eyes went first to Ray, and then to me, and then back to Ray. And I saw something pass between them that I did not have a name for. He said, "You brought the nephew." Ray said, "I brought Jake." Dennis nodded once and folded the chart the rest of the way and did not say anything else about it. I remember thinking that was strange, and I remember filing it away under bush pilots are strange, which is a category most people in northern Manitoba maintain without any active thought. I did not think about it again for years. We flew in that afternoon. The weather was clear, and the light was that flat winter blue that makes the trees look black and the lakes look like scars in the ground. Ray sat up front with Dennis. Marcus and I sat in the back with the gear. The valley we were flying into was about 40 kilometers northeast of Thompson, in a section of Crown land that Ray had hunted for as long as I had known him. It was not on any tourist map. Dennis knew where it was because Dennis had flown Ray in there for at least 20 seasons. I could see the lake before I could see the cabin. It was a long, narrow lake bent like an elbow, with a ridge of granite rising from its western shore and thick black spruce running down to the water on all other sides. There was a small clearing on the north end, where a trapper's cabin had stood since the 50s, and a smaller clearing about 200 meters upslope, where Ray liked to set up a wall tent as a spike camp when the moose sign was in the wrong direction from the cabin. Dennis put us down on the ice at 3 in the afternoon. He helped us unload. He did not shut the engine off. This, too, I filed away and did not examine. Before he climbed back into the cockpit, he took Ray by the elbow and said something I did not hear, and Ray answered him, and Dennis looked at me for a long second, and then at the tree line behind me, and then he got in the plane and taxied out and lifted off the ice and was gone. The sound of the engine hung in the air for a long time after he was out of sight. Sound carries strangely in that country in winter. It goes further than you think it should, and it comes back to you off the rock and the ice in ways that make you think there are more of you than there are. Ray and Marcus and I stood on the ice with our gear at our feet and watched him go, and Ray said, "All right, let's move." That was the first day. That is all I need to tell you about the first day. What I want you to keep in mind, going forward, is that Ray asked me to come. He did not invite me. He asked me. And when I think back on that trip now, from the distance of 22 years, and a marriage and a son, and a lifetime of trying to understand what happened, that is the moment that opens the door. He asked me, and I said yes, and I did not ask why, and by the time I thought to ask, there was no one left to answer. We spent the first 2 days doing what hunters do. We opened the cabin, we cut wood, we walked the ridges we intended to sit. We found where the moose had been and where they were likely to be, and we set a routine. Ray took the west ridge. Marcus took the beaver flats south of the lake. I took the burn, a section of forest that had gone up in a lightning fire about 10 years earlier and had grown back in dense willow and young poplar, which is the kind of country a young bull moose likes in early winter, because it can bed down in cover and still have browse in reach. The routine mattered. Ray was a man who believed in routines. He said a routine let you notice when something wasn't right, and I did not understand what he meant by that at the time, because I was 28, and I thought routines were for people who couldn't hold their attention. The third morning was when I saw the track. I had gotten up earlier than either of them, because I wanted to be at the edge of the burn by first light. I was at the woodpile filling the box for the cabin stove when I looked down and saw it. It was pressed into the snow beside the chopping block, and it was 1.5 feet long, and it was not any animal I could name. I want to be careful about how I describe it, because in the 22 years since I have read a lot of things about tracks, and I have seen a lot of drawings, and I do not want to overlay anything I learned later onto what I saw that morning. So I'll tell you what I saw, and nothing else. It was bipedal. The stride, insofar as I could reconstruct it from where I stood, because there were only 2 prints visible, one at the woodpile, and one about 11 feet away toward the tree line, was too long for a man. 11 feet is a running stride for a tall man, and this track had not been running. The impression was flat, not toe-heavy, and the weight had gone straight down into the snow and stayed there. The snow at the edge of the print had not sloughed inward, which meant it had been made recently, probably in the last hour, before the wind at dawn had a chance to soften the edges. The print itself had 5 digits. The digits ended in what I first thought were claws, and then, looking closer, decided were more like the ends of long fingers frozen into hooks. The palm, I am using the word palm because I do not have a better one, was wider than my own boot, and I wore a size 12 pack. There was no fur impression, no pad structure like a bear. It was a hand, is what it was. It was a hand shaped wrong and pressed into the snow at a scale that a human hand could not have made. I stood there for a while. I don't know how long. I remember the cold on my face and the way my breath was catching in my scarf, and I remember hearing Ray come out of the cabin behind me and stop. He said, "Jake," I said, "come look at this." He came over. He did not speak. He crouched down beside the print, and he stayed crouched for a long time. He did not touch it. He looked at it, and then he looked at the second print 11 feet away, and then he looked up at the tree line, and then he looked back down. And here is the detail I want you to remember. When he looked up at the tree line, he did not scan it the way you scan for a bear. He looked up. He looked at a height above where the top of a man's head would be. He held that look for maybe 4 seconds, and then he stood up, and he brushed the snow off his knees, and he said, "Bear." I said, "That is not a bear track, Ray." He said, "It's a bear. Get your kit. We're losing light." He walked back toward the cabin. He did not look at the print again. I stood there, and I looked at it, and I took 2 photographs with the disposable camera I had brought in my pack, and then I filled the wood box, and I went inside. Marcus was at the table with a cup of coffee. Ray was leaning against the counter with his back to me. Marcus looked at Ray, and then he looked at me, and he said, "You saw it." I said, "Saw what?" Marcus said, "The track." Ray said, "Marcus." Marcus said, "The boy saw it, Ray. He's not stupid." Ray was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "It's a bear. Boars come out in November if the fall's warm. This fall was warm. It's a bear." Marcus looked at his coffee, and then he looked at me again, and he said, "You go up the burn today, Jake. You stay where I can see the ridge. You hear me?" I said, "I hear you." I did not push it. I did not push it because Ray had said it was a bear, and Ray was a man whose word I had never had reason to doubt, and because I was 28, and I trusted the men who had raised me more than I trusted the evidence of my own eyes. That was a mistake, and it was a small mistake compared to the ones that were coming. But it was the first one, and I want you to see it. I went up the burn that day. I sat until dark. I saw nothing. Not a moose, not a bird, not a red squirrel. Which was strange, because the burn had been full of red squirrels the previous 2 days, and red squirrels do not just leave. I did not think about that either at the time. When I came back to the cabin that night, the 2 prints by the woodpile were gone. Not filled in by weather. Gone. Someone had cleared them with a shovel and packed fresh snow over the spot. The chopping block had been moved 6 inches. Ray was inside cooking bannock, and he did not look up when I came in. I did not ask him about it. I do not know why I did not ask him. I think I was afraid of the answer. I think, even that early, some part of me had already understood that Ray knew things I did not, and that the shape of his knowing was not a shape I was ready to look at yet. That was day 3. There were 7 days to go. Day 4 is when I first heard it. We were in the cabin. It was late past 10, which is late in a country where the sun goes down at 4:30, and everybody's asleep by 8, and Marcus was oiling the action on his rifle at the table. Ray was reading a paperback western he had brought in his kit. I was writing in a small green notebook that Lisa had given me before I left, in which I had promised to keep a hunt journal because she wanted to know what my life was like when I was gone. I still have that notebook. I have not opened it in 19 years. It is in a locked box in the back of my bedroom closet with the other things I do not open. The scream came from the east side of the lake. It was long. That is the first thing I want to say about it. It was long in a way that a lynx cannot make a sound, because a lynx does not have the lung capacity, and it was not a wolf howl, because a wolf howl rises and falls, and this did not rise and fall. It just went on at a single wavering pitch, for what I later worked out to be somewhere around 11 or 12 seconds. It was not a bear. Bears do not scream. They roar, and they woof, and they cough. They do not scream. It sounded like a woman. That is the second thing I want to say about it, and it is the harder thing to say, because the moment I say it, your imagination gives you the wrong picture. It did not sound like a woman being hurt. It sounded like a woman calling, as if she were standing on the far shore of the lake in the dark and calling someone by name across the ice. And the name was being stretched out into a single long sound, because the distance was too great for a shorter word to carry. Marcus stopped oiling his rifle. Ray closed his book. I said, "What was that?" Marcus said, "Lynx." He said it fast. Too fast. Ray said, "Not a lynx." They looked at each other. It was a long look. Marcus set the rag down on the table, and he picked up his rifle, and he loaded 5 rounds into the magazine, one at a time, deliberately, and then he chambered one and put the safety on and set the rifle across his knees. He did not put it back in the corner where it had been. He kept it on his lap. I said, "Ray, what was that?" Ray was quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Something that remembers me." I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "Go to bed, Jake." I did not go to bed. I sat at the table with my notebook open, and I wrote down the time, 10:47, and I wrote down what I had heard, as best I could describe it, and I wrote down what Ray had said, and I underlined it twice. That page is still in the notebook. I have not needed to open it to remember what it says. I have carried the word something that remembers me around in my head every winter for 22 years. The scream came again about 40 minutes later. It was closer. Marcus stood up. He went to the window and pulled the curtain aside about an inch and looked out. The window faced the lake. There was a moon that night, a 3/4 moon, and the ice was lit up like a floor. Marcus stood at the window for a long time and did not move. Ray said, "Anything?" Marcus said, "No." He said it in a voice that meant nothing I can see. Not nothing is there. He stayed at the window. I got up and went to the other window, the one that faced the tree line, and I looked out. The spruce line was maybe 30 yards from the cabin. The trees were tall and close-packed, and the space between them was black. I could not see anything in that blackness, but I had the feeling, and I have the feeling still, now, telling you about it, that the blackness was not empty, that there was a place inside it, at about the height of the 3rd or 4th branch of a mature spruce, which is to say a good 4 feet above where a man's head would be, where the black was denser than it should have been, where it had a shape. I stared at it. It did not move. I did not blink for as long as I could stand not to blink, because I was afraid that if I blinked, the shape would be somewhere else when I opened my eyes. When I finally had to blink, the shape was still there. It had not moved. But I had the distinct impression, as clear to me as anything I have ever known, that it was looking back at me. Ray said, "Jake, get away from the window." I did not move. He said it again, sharper. "Jake!" I stepped back from the window. I let the curtain fall. And in the moment the curtain fell, I heard from the tree line a single soft sound, not a scream, a breath, a long exhale, like a man letting out a lungful of smoke, but bigger, much bigger. And then nothing. We did not sleep that night. Marcus sat at the table with his rifle across his lap. Ray sat on the edge of the bunk with his own rifle beside him. I lay in my bag on the floor, and I stared at the ceiling, and I listened. Around 3 in the morning, Ray said quietly, in a voice I do not think Marcus heard, "I'm sorry, Jake." I don't know if he thought I was asleep. I did not answer. I did not know how to answer. I lay there, and I turned the words over in my head, and I could not fit them to anything. And eventually I did fall asleep, sometime near dawn, and when I woke up, Marcus was outside splitting wood as if nothing had happened, and Ray was making coffee, and the cabin smelled like bacon, and the light through the frost on the window was pink and ordinary. But the scream had happened, and Ray's apology had happened, and the shape in the spruce line had happened, and whatever was going to come next had already started, whether I understood it or not. Day 6 is when it showed itself to me. I had gone up the burn again, alone. Marcus and Ray had gone west together, which was unusual. They normally split up during daylight to cover more ground, and I understood, without being told, that they did not want either of them out there by themselves anymore. I did not point out that this left me by myself. Neither did they. I understood, also without being told, that whatever was happening on this trip was not happening to me the way it was happening to them. That there was a category of danger they were in, and I was, for the moment, in a different category. I did not know what that category was. I found out that evening. The burn was quiet again. The red squirrels had not come back. There were no jays, no chickadees, no ravens. I want to explain to somebody who has not spent time in the boreal in winter what that means. That country is never silent. Even in the coldest weeks of January, there are ravens. Ravens are always there. They are the sound of the north, the way traffic is the sound of a city. When they are not there, You notice it the way you would notice all the streetlights on your block going out at the same time. They were not there. I sat on a fallen jack pine at the north edge of the burn, with my back to a stand of live spruce, and I watched the willow flats until the light started to go. I did not see a moose. I did not really expect to. I was, by that point, going through the motions of hunting, because Ray had told me to go through the motions. And going through motions is the kind of thing that keeps a person from thinking about anything else. The sun set at 4:30. I gave it another 20 minutes, because the last 20 minutes of legal light are often the best for moose, and then I stood up and I shouldered my rifle and I turned to walk back down to the cabin. It was standing between two spruces about 40 yards uphill from me. I want to describe what I saw with as much accuracy as I can, and I want to warn you that accuracy here is limited by the light, which was blue and low, and by my own eyes, which have not been the same since. What I saw was tall. It was standing on two legs. Its head was above the lowest branch of the spruce on its left, and I later measured that branch at 7 feet 6 inches from the ground, which means the top of its head was around 8 feet. Its arms were long. They hung down past its knees. Its skin, or hide, was pale, not white, but the color of the underside of a fish, a dead blue-gray that did not belong on anything that was supposed to be alive. There was hair on its head and along its shoulders, matted with ice. I could see its ribs. I could see the shape of its skull under the skin of its face. Its face was where I stopped being able to describe things well, and I want to be honest about that, because a lot of people who have written about this kind of encounter go into detail about the face, and I think most of them are lying. I did not see the face clearly. I saw that it had one. I saw that the mouth was open, and that the mouth was too wide for the head. I saw that there were eyes, and that the eyes were looking at me, and that the eyes did not shine the way an animal's eyes shine in low light. They absorbed light. They were darker than the space around them. It did not move. I did not move. We stood there and looked at each other for what I later worked out to be, from the light, somewhere around 90 seconds. It felt like an hour. I did not raise my rifle. I want you to understand that this was not because I was calm. I was not calm. I was so afraid I could feel the fear in my back teeth. I did not raise my rifle because I understood, in the same wordless way you understand that a stove is hot before you touch it, that raising my rifle would end me, that it was not going to move as long as I did not move, and that if I moved, whatever it was doing, and it was doing something specific, would stop, and then something else would start. So I stood. And here is the thing I have not told anyone, and here is the thing that has stayed with me longer than the sight of it. While it was looking at me, it tilted its head. It tilted its head the way my Uncle Ray tilted his head. Ray had a habit, when he was trying to decide something, of dropping his chin a little and canting his whole head to the right, so that his right ear came about 2 inches closer to his shoulder. He did it when he was reading the weather, and when he was working out a math problem in his head, and when he was listening to a man he did not believe. It was not a big movement. It was almost private. If you did not know him, you would not notice it. This thing did it. It dropped its chin. It canted its head to the right, and it held that position, and it looked at me. And I understood in that moment that it was thinking about something, and that the something it was thinking about was me. Then, slowly, without any sound, it stepped backward into the tree line. Not the way an animal moves. The way a man steps out of a room he has already decided to leave. 2 steps, and it was gone. I stood there for another minute or so. I do not remember much about the walk down. I remember that my hands were shaking so hard I could not get the rifle sling seated on my shoulder, and I ended up carrying it in both hands like a farmer with a broom. I remembered that the cabin came into view sooner than I expected, and that the lantern was already lit inside, and that Ray was standing on the porch with a mug of coffee, and that when he saw my face, he set the mug down on the porch rail and came out to meet me. He said, "It showed itself to you." I said, "Yes." He said, "Just to you." I said, "Yes." He looked at me for a long time. His face did the thing his face did when he was working something out, not the head tilt. A different thing. A softening around the eyes that I'd only seen twice before in my life. Once when my mother had gone to the hospital, and once when he had put down a dog I had loved when I was 14. He said, "Come inside, Jake. It's time we talked." Marcus was at the table. Marcus had a bottle of rye out that I had not seen him touch on any hunt we had ever been on, and he had a glass in front of him, and he had already poured 2 more. Ray sat down across from him, and Ray poured himself one and pushed the 3rd glass at me and said, "Sit." I sat. Ray said, "It only shows itself to one of us at a time. That's how it works. And it showed itself to you tonight, which means it's decided something, and that means I have to tell you some things I did not want to have to tell you." I said, "Ray, what is it?" He said, "You know what it is?" And I did. That's the part I keep coming back to. I did know. I had known since the track by the woodpile. I had known since the scream. I had a word for it, that I had learned in a book when I was a boy, and that Ray himself had taught me not to say out loud in the bush. I did not say it now, either. I did not have to. All 3 of us knew what we were talking about. Ray said, "My father hunted this valley. His father hunted this valley. I've been coming here since I was your age. There is a thing that lives in this valley, and it has an arrangement with our family, and I did not tell you about it before we came in, because I wanted to believe it was over. I wanted to believe it had moved on. I was wrong about that, and I am sorry." I said, "What arrangement?" Ray said, "That's what I have to show you." He got up. He went to his kit in the corner, and he opened the top flap, and he took out a small oilcloth bundle that he had never opened in front of me before. He brought it back to the table, and he set it down between us, and he untied the string. Inside the oilcloth was a stack of photographs. Old ones. Black and white. Some of them so old the emulsion had started to lift at the corners. He took the top one off the stack, and he slid it across the table to me. I looked down at it. And that is where I want to stop this chapter, because what I saw in that photograph is where the story I thought I was in ended, and the story I was actually in began. The photograph showed a young man standing in a clearing at the edge of a lake. He was holding a rifle across his body in the low port position, the way a hunter carries a rifle when he is walking and does not expect to shoot, but wants to be ready. The rifle was a Remington 7.21, which was the predecessor to the Model 700, and which I recognized because Ray kept one on a rack in the mudroom at home and had shown me how to strip it when I was 12. The young man was wearing a wool coat and a fur hat with the ear flaps down, and he was smiling in a small, closed-mouth way that I had seen on my own face in every photograph anyone had ever taken of me from the age of about 14. He was standing in the clearing behind Ray's cabin. I could see the corner of the cabin at the edge of the frame. I could see the ridge behind it. I could see the granite outcrop on the west side of the lake. The date printed along the white border of the photograph was November 1958. I looked at Ray. Ray was watching me. He did not say anything. I said, "This is my grandfather." Ray said, "Yes." I said, "This is the cabin." Ray said, "Yes." I said, "He was 28." Ray said, "He was 28." I want to tell you about my grandfather, because until that moment I had not thought about him in a long time. His name was Albert Delacroix. He had been a trapper and a mill hand in the Pas his whole life. He died in 1981, when I was 6, of a stroke, in a chair in his kitchen. I remember him as a small, quiet man, with hands that were always cold and a habit of pressing them against my neck to make me laugh. I did not know he had hunted this valley. I did not know he had hunted at all, particularly because by the time I knew him, he had not been in the bush in years. Ray had never talked about him much. My mother had never talked about him either. He had been a father, and then he had been a grandfather, and then he had been a memory, and none of the memories had included this valley. Ray said he came in here in November of 1958 with his brother Emile and a man named Henri Cardinal. 10-day hunt. Same as us. Same cabin. My father was the youngest of the 3. He was 28. He paused. He said he was the only one who came out. I looked at the photograph. I looked at the smile. I looked at the rifle. I looked at the corner of the cabin. I felt something in my chest that I did not have a word for at the time and do not have a word for now, except to say that it was the feeling of a floor I had been standing on my whole life, turning out to be the ceiling of a room I did not know was there. Ray said he never told me what happened, not the whole thing. He told me one thing, and he made me promise never to say it out loud until I had to. What he told me was that on the 9th night of that hunt, something came out of the trees, and it killed his brother, and it killed Henry Cardinal, and it stood in front of him and looked at him, and it did not kill him, and it turned around, and it went back into the trees, and he walked out alone, and he never came back into this valley for the rest of his life. I said, "But you come here." Ray said, "I do." I said, "Why?" He did not answer for a long time. He took the second photograph off the stack. He turned it around and pushed it across to me. It was Ray. It was Ray at 28, standing in the same clearing, holding the same rifle in the same low port. The date on the border said November 1979. He said, "I came in with 2 men in 1979, Danny Whitecloud and my cousin Paul. I was the youngest. I was 28. On the 9th night, something came out of the trees, and it killed Danny, and it killed Paul, and it stood in front of me and looked at me, and it did not kill me. And it turned around, and it went back into the trees, and I walked out alone." I said, "Ray." He said, "Once a generation, Jake, the men in our family come into this valley, and one of them comes out. That's the arrangement. I do not know who made it. I do not know why. My father would not tell me, and I have never found anyone who could. I know only that it is real, because I have lived it, and because my father lived it, and because his father before him lived it in 1927, and there are photographs of that too, in a box at my house that I did not bring with me because I could not stand to." He took a sip of his rye. His hand was steady. Marcus was not looking at either of us. Marcus was looking at his own hands on the table, and his hands were not steady. Ray said, "I did not want to bring you. I want to say that first. I have known since the day you were born that this would come, that I would have to bring you, or someone would have to bring you, and I have spent your entire life trying to think of a way out of it. There isn't one. I asked around. I asked an old woman in Nelson House who knew things. I asked a priest in Thompson who was not a priest anymore. I read every book in the Pas library that had anything in it about this. There is no way out. The valley calls once a generation, and if you do not come, it comes to you, and it does not come politely. My Uncle Emile's son tried to stay out in 1979. That's why my cousin Paul had to come with me. Paul was Emile's grandson. He was already sick by the time we flew in. The valley had already started. I said, "Started what?" Ray said, taking. It takes what it's owed one way or the other. If you come to it, it takes it here. If you do not come to it, it takes it at home. And what it takes at home is worse, because it takes it slow, and it takes more than one. And there's no walking out. I sat with that for a while. I looked at the photograph of my grandfather. I looked at the photograph of Ray. I looked at the third photograph that Ray had not yet pushed across the table, the one still in the stack, whose date I could see in the light from the lantern. November 1927. I did not ask to see it. I did not need to see it. I said, "Marcus." Marcus looked up. His eyes were wet. I had never seen Marcus's eyes wet before, not at his father's funeral, not at either of his daughter's weddings. I said, "You knew this before you came." He said, "I've known for 31 years, Jake, since Ray came out of here alone in '79 and showed up on my porch in April and told me what had happened. I was the only person he told. I am the only person alive besides you who knows, and I came in this time because he asked me. Because it's not right for a man to do this alone. It's not right for you either." He looked at Ray. He said, "I told you not to bring him, Ray." Ray said, "I know." Marcus said, "I told you we could break it. I told you we could stop coming. I told you the boy didn't have to know." Ray said, "And I told you what would happen if we tried. Same as my father told me. Same as his father told him." Marcus looked back at me. He said, "Kid, I'm sorry." I did not say anything for a long time. I remember I picked up the glass Ray had poured for me, and I drank it in one swallow, and it burned all the way down, and I did not feel it. I remember I looked at the photograph of my grandfather in 1958, and I thought about his cold hands on the back of my neck when I was 5 years old. I remember I thought about my mother, who was still alive then, and who had never once been in this cabin, and had never once heard this story, and who I understood in that moment had been protected from it her whole life by 2 men who had been carrying it for her. I remember I thought about Lisa, at home in the Pas, who I was going to ask to marry me in the spring. I remember I thought about the child I did not yet have, and I said the thing that has haunted me for 22 years. I said it because I was 28, and I was scared, and I still thought there was a way out, and I want you to hear me say it now, in this telling, because it is one of the 3 things I said I would not tell anyone, and I am telling it after all. I said, "Ray, if it comes for us, let it take me." Ray looked at me for a long time. He did not answer. Then he said, "It doesn't work that way, Jake. It chooses." He got up from the table, and he put the photographs back in the oilcloth, and he tied the string, and he set them back in his kit. He picked up his rifle, and he checked the safety, and he set it beside the door. He turned off the lantern. He said, "Get some sleep. We've got 3 days." I did not sleep. I lay on the floor, and I stared at the ceiling, and I listened to the wind pick up outside the cabin, and somewhere around 2 in the morning I heard the scream again, the long, calling scream, and this time it was coming from the ridge above the cabin, and it was much closer than it had been on the 4th night, and I understood that whatever the thing was, it was moving toward us, slowly, deliberately, the way a man walks toward a debt. I want to tell you about the 7th and 8th days together, because in my memory, they have collapsed into a single stretch of time that I do not experience as 2 separate days, but as one long, held breath. The camp changed after Ray showed me the photographs. Nothing about the routine changed. We still got up in the dark. We still ate. We still went out to sit. We still came back before full dark. We still cooked and ate and talked and cleaned the rifles and went to bed. But the meaning of the routine had changed, and that changed everything else. Ray had said that a routine let you notice when something wasn't right. I understood now what he had meant. We were performing normalcy on purpose. We were performing it because the thing in the trees was watching, and Ray believed and I understood, without being told, that this was one of the rules, that a man who kept his routine was harder to select than a man who did not. The tracks got closer. On the morning of the 7th day, I found a print at the corner of the cabin itself, in the snow beside the front step. Just one. It was pressed deep. The digits ended in the same hook shape I had seen at the woodpile. It was pointed toward the door. Ray looked at it. He did not react. He shoveled it away with the same shovel we used for the outhouse path, and he did not speak of it. The gear moved at night. I want to be careful here, because I have thought about this many times, and I have considered the possibility that one of us was moving the gear in his sleep and forgetting. I do not believe that is what happened, but I want to name the possibility so you know I have considered it. What I saw was this. On the morning of the 7th day, my rifle case, which I had leaned against the wall beside the bunk before going to bed, was on the porch, upright, leaning against the door. Not knocked over. Placed. On the morning of the 8th day, Ray's boots, which he had set inside the door, were outside the door, side by side, facing away from the cabin, as if a man had stepped out of them, going away. On the afternoon of the 8th day, a coffee mug that Marcus had left on the porch rail. Marcus's mug, blue enamel with a chip on the handle, had been placed upside down on top of the chopping block, in the exact position where the first track had been. Marcus said, when he saw the mug, "It's telling us." Ray said, "It's telling us what we already know." Marcus said, "Then why is it telling us?" Ray did not answer. The scream came every night now. It came at different times. Sometimes it came twice. On the 7th night, it answered itself one scream from the ridge above the cabin, and then a second scream, much shorter, from the direction of the lake, and then silence. I lay in my bag, and I understood that there might be two of them, and I understood also that Ray had not mentioned this possibility, and I understood that Ray probably already knew it, and had already decided not to mention it. There is a kind of protection that men extend to each other by withholding information. I had been on the receiving end of it my whole life without recognizing it. I recognized it now. I asked Ray, on the morning of the 8th day, sitting outside on the porch with a cup of coffee while Marcus was inside packing his day kit, about the rule. I said, "Ray, what are the rules of this?" He looked at me over his cup. He said, "You want the rules." I said, "I want the rules." He said, "All right, as best I understand them." My father told me 2. His father told him 3, and I have worked out one more on my own. So there are 4 rules I can give you. There may be others. I do not claim to know them all. He set his cup down on the porch rail. He said, 1. Every generation of our family, 3 men go into this valley in November, and 1 comes out. That's the arrangement. It has been the arrangement since at least 1927, and I have reason to believe it is older than that. He said, 2. The men do not choose which one comes out. The valley chooses. What my father called it, chooses. I do not know how it chooses, and neither did he. He said, 3. You do not shoot at it. My father was very clear about this. He said, if it comes for you, and you are the one it is not choosing, you do not shoot. If you shoot, the arrangement changes. I do not know what that means. I only know that my father said it, and I have never seen a reason to test it. He picked his cup back up. He looked out at the lake. He said, 4. This one is mine. The one who comes out, the one who is chosen to come out, brings the next one in, 20-some years later. My father brought me in, his father brought him in, and I brought you in. He drank his coffee. I said, "So I am the one who is going to come out." He said, "I don't know that. I hope so. That's why you're here. But I do not know it, because I do not know how the choice is made, and I would be lying to you if I said I could guarantee it." I said, "What if I refuse to come out? What if it kills you and Marcus, and then it comes for me?" And I let it. He said, "Then it kills you, and it goes home, and there is no next generation of Delacroix men, and either it is finished, or it goes and finds another family with the same debt. I don't know which." My father did not know either. I said, "Would that be so bad, if it ended with us?" He was quiet for a long time. He said, "Jake, I have thought about that question every year of my life since I was your age. I do not know the answer. I know that if I break the arrangement, I do not know what breaks with it. I know that my father tried to think about breaking it, and did not do it. And he was a smarter man than me. I know that Marcus tried to talk me into not coming this year, and I did not do it, because I was afraid of what happens to a man who does not honor a thing this old. I am not asking you to make my choices, Jake. I am telling you what I chose. When it is your turn to choose, you will choose for yourself, and I will not be there to argue with you." He looked at me. He said, "But if I have a preference, and this is the only preference I will ever state to you on this matter, my preference is that you go home to that girl of yours in the pass, and you marry her, and you have a boy of your own, and you decide then, with your boy in front of you, what you want to teach him, and what you want to spare him. That is a decision I did not get to make. My father made it for me in 1975, when he told me the story on my 28th birthday. I would like you to get to make it." He finished his coffee. He stood up. He said, "Come on, let's go sit the West Ridge. Both of us. Marcus can stay with the cabin." We went. We sat. We did not see a moose. We did not talk. We came back before dark. That night, the 8th night, Ray sat down at the table after supper, and he wrote something in a small leather notebook that he carried in his chest pocket. He wrote for maybe 5 minutes. He tore the page out. He folded it into a small square. He put it back in the chest pocket of his coat, which was hanging on the peg by the door. I did not ask him what he had written. I understood, without being told, that it was a letter I was going to read later, and that reading it would be one of the things I would carry for the rest of my life. I was right about that. I have carried it. I still have it. I will show it to you before this is done. The wind came up around midnight. By 2 in the morning it was a full storm. By 4 in the morning the cabin was rocking on its footings, and the stovepipe was singing, and the whole world outside the window was a gray-white wall. Ray got up at first light. He looked out the window. He said, "It's coming today." Marcus said, "How do you know?" Ray said, "Because it's a whiteout, and a whiteout is what it's been waiting for." He was right. I want to tell this chapter carefully. I have told it in my head 1,000 times, and every time I tell it differently, because the mind does not want to hold a memory like this in the same shape twice. It rounds the edges. It rewrites the sequence. It gives you back a version that is easier to live with than the one that actually happened. I am going to try, tonight, to tell you the version that actually happened. If I fail in places, that is my fault, and not the fault of what I saw. We spent the 9th day inside the cabin. Ray decided we would not sit that day, because the storm was bad enough that a man could get lost between the cabin and the outhouse, and because although he did not say this out loud, he wanted us together. Marcus and I played cribbage for 3 hours in the afternoon. Ray oiled his rifle, then Marcus's, then mine. He did not oil his own rifle a second time. He did not need to. He was oiling ours because he had already accepted that his own was not going to be the one that mattered. Around 4 in the afternoon, Ray said, "We should move the camp up to the spike." Marcus said, "In this weather." Ray said, "In this weather. The cabin is a box. If it comes to the cabin, we are boxed. The spike is in the open. We can see." Marcus said, "Ray." Ray said, "I've thought about it, Marcus. I've thought about it for 2 days. It's better in the open." I understood later that Ray was doing 2 things at once. He was giving us a fighting chance, because a cabin in a whiteout with a thing that could take a door off its hinges is a coffin, and the open ground of the spike camp gave us angles. And he was also, in a way I do not think Marcus fully understood, giving the creature what it wanted. The spike camp was in a clearing. It was visible. It was, as Ray had said, in the open. It was the kind of ground where a thing that lived by an arrangement could complete a transaction cleanly. We hiked up to the spike in the storm. It was maybe 200 meters, but it took us the better part of an hour, because the wind was full in our faces, and the snow was blowing sideways at what I later learned was a sustained 60 kilometers an hour with gusts higher. The wall tent was where we had left it, staked hard against a low granite shoulder that broke some of the wind off the west. The lantern was in the crate beside the tent flap, along with the extra fuel. Ray lit the lantern before it was fully dark. He set it on top of the crate. He said, "It'll see us." I said, "Isn't that what we don't want?" He said, "It's coming anyway. Better it sees us than surprises us." Marcus said, "Ray, if we're doing this, we should have the rifles up." Ray said, "The rifles are up." They were. Marcus was carrying his in his hands. Ray had his slung across his chest on a shortened strap that put the grip against his ribs. I had mine slung on my right shoulder, muzzle down. Ray reached over and moved it to a 2-point sling across my back and turned the muzzle up. He did not explain. I understood. The creature came at 7:41 p.m. I know the time because Marcus's watch stopped in the fall, and when I found it 3 days later on the walk out, it read 7:41. I have never taken that watch off my dresser at home. It sits there still. It has never been wound again. I did not hear it come. That is the first thing I want to say. It did not scream. It did not breathe. It did not crack a branch or shift a stone. In a storm that loud, you would not have heard those things anyway. But I want to name the absence for you, because I have thought about it many times. It came in silence, in a moment when there should have been sound, and its silence was the loudest thing about it. I was standing in front of the tent flap. Ray was to my left, about 4 feet away, facing the tree line with his rifle low. Marcus was behind us, closer to the crate, tightening a strap on his kit, because he had said he wanted a candy bar and had bent to look for one. The lantern was on the crate. The lantern was, in my memory, the brightest thing in the world. It came out of the spruce line at a dead angle to Ray, from his right side, which was the side he could not see because Marcus and I were on his left. It came fast. It covered what I later paced out to be about 18 feet, in what could not have been more than a second. Ray had time to start to turn. He did not have time to raise his rifle. Marcus, behind him, saw it first. Marcus screamed the word I did not recognize. I have since asked 3 people who speak Cree and 1 who speaks Mishif what it might have been, and I have gotten 3 different answers, and I do not know which is correct. And Marcus tried to step forward, and his foot caught the corner of the crate, and he went down backward into the snow. The creature reached Ray. I saw its arm move. That is all I saw, because in that same second, I did what Ray had trained me to do since I was 10. I turned. I put my body square to the target. I brought my rifle up off my back and into my shoulder in one motion. I dropped the safety with my thumb as the muzzle came up. I found the sight picture. My finger settled on the trigger. My breathing was steady. The creature was on Ray. Ray was on the ground. Ray was, I realized later, already dead by the time I had the sight picture, because the arm had come down once, and the arm had done what the arm was meant to do, and there was no version of Ray that was going to stand up again. I did not know that yet. In the moment, I only knew that my uncle was on the ground with a thing on top of him, and that Marcus was on his back in the snow behind me, and that I had a rifle at my shoulder, and that this was the moment I had been trained for. I did not fire. I want to explain why, again, because I have had 22 years to think about it, and I still cannot explain it fully. Ray's rule was Rule 3. If it comes for you, and you are the one it is not choosing, you do not shoot. I remembered the rule. I want you to know I remembered it. It was the loudest thought in my head. But I am not the kind of man who would have obeyed a rule like that in the moment, if the moment had asked me a different question. I am not that obedient. I would have fired. I would have fired at anything that had my uncle on the ground. What stopped me was not the rule. What stopped me was that the creature raised its head from Ray's body, and it looked at me. It was 8 feet away. Its eyes were the eyes I had seen at the edge of the burn. Dark, absorbing eyes that did not shine. Its face was the face I had not been able to describe 2 days before, and I still cannot describe it, except that its mouth was open and there was steam coming off its teeth in the cold. There was blood on its jaw. Ray's blood. I want to name that, because I do not want to soften it. There was my uncle's blood on this thing's mouth, and it looked at me over Ray's body, and it tilted its head to the right. The way Ray tilted his head. The way I understood. In the whitest and coldest second of my entire life, I tilted mine. I lowered the rifle. I did not decide to lower the rifle. My arms lowered the rifle. My arms had made a decision that my mind had not yet caught up to. My finger came off the trigger. The muzzle came down. The safety went back on. I did not hear it click, but I felt it in my thumb. The creature stood up. It stood up off my uncle's body, and it was taller than I had realized in the tree line, and it was closer than I had realized in the storm, and I could smell it now. A smell like river mud and burnt hair, and something old. Something like an attic in a house nobody had lived in for 50 years. It took one step toward me. I did not move. It took a second step. It was now near enough that I could have reached out and put my hand on its chest if I had been the kind of man who would do a thing like that. It looked at me. It tilted its head the other way. And then, and I have thought about this, and I have thought about this, and I do not know how else to say it, it recognized me. Its face did something. Not a human expression. I do not want to overstate it. But the muscles under the skin of that face rearranged themselves in a way that was not the way they had been arranged a second before. And the rearrangement was one I understood. I understood it the way you understand a face in a photograph in a family album. I understood it the way you understand a stranger at a bus stop who turns out, 3 sentences into the conversation, to be your second cousin. It knew me, and I knew it. I do not know what that means. I have not known what that means for 22 years. I have some theories now, and I am going to tell you 2 of them before this is done. But in that moment, I did not have theories. In that moment, I only had the fact of it, which was that this creature and I were, in some way I did not have the language for, related. It turned its head. It looked past me. It looked at Marcus, who was on his back in the snow, screaming that word I did not recognize, trying to get his rifle up. I said, and this is the second thing I have not told anyone, and I'm telling it now, I said, out loud to it, he's with me. I do not know why I said it. I do not know if I thought it would work. I said it, and the creature looked at me for another second, and then it moved past me, and it went to Marcus, and Marcus got one shot off. The shot went wide, into the storm, into the dark. And then the creature was on him, and the second shot Marcus did not get to take, and I stood there with my rifle across my body, and I did not fire, and I did not fire, and I did not fire. It took a long time, longer than the first one. I do not want to describe it. I want you to know that I stood there for the whole thing, and I did not turn away, because Marcus had come into this valley for my uncle and for me, and the least I could do was not turn my eyes from what my not firing had bought. When it was finished, the creature stood up. It was not 8 feet from me now. It was 6. It was 5. It stepped over Marcus and it walked toward me, and it did not stop until its face was so close to mine that I could see myself in the black of its eye. I did not raise the rifle. I did not step back. I do not remember breathing. It looked at me for a long time. Then it lowered its head, and it did something I do not know how to explain, except by telling you exactly what it did. It pressed its forehead against my forehead, just for a moment. The bone of its skull against the bone of mine. The skin between us was thin and cold, and it did not feel like the skin of anything I had ever touched. It smelled, up close, of Ray, of the wool of my uncle's coat, of the tobacco he used to smoke when I was small. It stepped back. It looked at me one more time, and then it turned, and it walked into the storm, and it did not run. It walked. The way a man walks away from a door he has closed behind him. In 3 strides it was gone into the whiteout, and I could not see it, and I could not hear it. And I stood alone in the clearing with the lantern still burning on the crate, and my uncle in the snow to my left, and Marcus in the snow behind me, and the wind coming up harder, and my rifle in my hand still loaded and still cold. I stood there for a long time. I do not know how long. When I finally moved, I moved to Ray first. I knelt down beside him. I put my hand on his chest. I do not know why. He was gone. I knew he was gone, but I put my hand on his chest and I said out loud, "I'm sorry, Ray." And then I found the chest pocket of his coat, and I unbuttoned it, and I took out the folded square of paper he had written the night before, and I put it in my own chest pocket, and I did not open it. I did not open it for 3 days. Then I went to Marcus. There was nothing to do for Marcus except close his eyes, which I did, because it seemed important to close his eyes, though there was not much of his face left to close them on. Then I stood up. I put the lantern out. I went into the tent. I sat down on my bag with my rifle across my knees, and I waited for morning. Nothing came for me that night. Nothing has come for me since. I walked out on the 10th day. The storm broke around noon. I did not bury Ray or Marcus because the ground was frozen 4 feet down, and I did not have the tools, and I did not have the time, and because I understood that Ray and Marcus were no longer in the bodies in the snow, and that the bodies would be found in the spring by whoever came looking, and that whoever came looking would tell the story the way it needed to be told. I did what I could. I moved them into the tent. I closed the tent flap. I weighted the corners with rocks against the wind. I took Ray's rifle and Marcus's rifle, and I broke them down, and I wrapped the actions in oilcloth, and I put them in my pack, because I did not want either of those rifles left for scavengers or for anyone else to find. I took Ray's chest bag. I took Marcus's wallet, so I could give it to Denise. I took Marcus's watch, which had stopped at 7:41. I took the oilcloth bundle of photographs from Ray's kit. I did not take the 3rd photograph out. I have not looked at the 3rd photograph to this day. It is in the same box as the notebook and the watch. Then I put on my snowshoes and I started walking. The cabin was on a lake that did not have a road to it. The nearest road was 38 kilometers south, along a series of connecting waterways and portages that Ray had taught me when I was 16. Dennis Kirby was going to pick us up on the 22nd at 3 in the afternoon on the ice of the lake we had flown into. I had 4 days to get to the pickup. I could have waited at the cabin. I could have kept the wood stove burning and waited for Dennis. I did not. I could not stay in that cabin. I could not sleep in that cabin with the wall tent up on the ridge above it. I walked out. I want to tell you about the walk, briefly, because it is where I read the letter, and because it is where the second twist lives. The first day of the walk, I did not think about anything. That is the honest answer. My mind was flat. I moved. I ate cold food from my pack. I did not stop except to drink water and to relieve myself. I made about 12 kilometers. I slept in a cold camp under a spruce with a fire small enough to boil water and nothing else, because I did not want a fire that could be seen from any distance. Nothing came near me in the night. I heard no screams. I heard nothing but the wind, and once, a raven, a single raven, calling from far away, which was the first raven I had heard in the valley in 9 days, and which I understood without needing to be told, meant that whatever had been keeping the ravens away had stopped keeping them away. The second day, I read the letter. I stopped at noon on a bare rock ridge with a good view south, and I sat with my back to a lightning-struck pine, and I took the folded square of paper out of my chest pocket, and I opened it. Ray's handwriting was the way it had always been, small, blocky, careful. He had used a pencil. The letter was short. I am going to give it to you in full, because it is not mine to summarize. Jake, if you are reading this, I did not walk out. I am sorry for that. I am more sorry that you had to see it than that it happened. I have known since 1979 that this year was coming, and I have not found a way to make it not come. I tried. Some things I did not tell you. 1. I do not think it kills us because it hates us. I think it kills us because that is the shape of the arrangement, and the arrangement is older than any of us, and it is not for a thing like that to break it any more than it is for us. I have come to believe that it is as tired as we are. I want you to hold on to that, if you can. 2. My father told me one thing the night before he died that I have never told anyone, including Marcus. He said that in 1927, his father, your great-grandfather, did not come into this valley for a hunt. He came in for a burial. He came in with 2 other men, and they buried something in this valley that they had brought up from the south, and the arrangement began that night, and the 2 other men did not come out. I do not know what they buried. My father did not know either. I only know that this is not an ancient thing on our family. It is 100 years old this year. There is a beginning to it, and if there is a beginning, there may be an end. 3. I'm asking you to try to find the end. Not now, not soon. When your son is grown. I am asking you to look for what my great-grandfather buried, and I am asking you to consider whether it can be undone, because I could not undo it in my life, and I would like it undone in yours or in his. I know this is not fair. I know I am handing you a thing and asking you to fix it. I am asking anyway. You are the only person I trust with it. 4. Tell Lisa I said thank you. She does not know why. Tell her, anyway. Ray. I sat on the rock ridge for a long time with the letter in my lap. I did not cry. I have not cried about that hunt. Not once. In 22 years. And I do not know what that says about me. What I did do was fold the letter back up and put it in my chest pocket, and stand up and keep walking. I made the pickup lake on the afternoon of the 22nd. Dennis Kirby's Cessna came in on skis at 3:05, and Dennis stepped out onto the ice. and he saw me alone on the shoreline with 3 rifles across my pack and Ray's chest bag on my shoulder, and he sat down in the snow and cried for a full minute before he said anything, exactly as I told you at the beginning. The first thing he said was, "Where's Ray?" I said, "In the valley." He nodded. He did not ask about Marcus. He loaded me into the plane. He flew me to Thompson. He did not speak to me again for the rest of that year. I gave a statement to the RCMP the next morning. I said that Ray and Marcus had been attacked by a bear in a whiteout, that I had not been present at the attack because I had been inside the tent, and that by the time I got outside, there was nothing to be done. The corporal who took my statement was a man named Delisle, who had known Ray for 20 years. He wrote it down. He did not ask me follow-up questions. He asked me if I wanted a coffee. He drove me to the bus station in his own truck. The case was closed 6 weeks later. Cause of death, consistent with animal attack. No further investigation. I want to tell you 2 more things, and then I want to stop. The first thing is that on the 4th of December, 10 days after I got back to the POS, I was going through the pockets of Ray's chest bag to see if there was anything I should give to my mother, and I found a second photograph. It was not with the oilcloth stack. It was in an interior pocket by itself, in a small waxed paper envelope, and it was in color, and it was recent. It was of me. It was of me at the age of 9, standing at the edge of a spruce line, in a place I could not identify, wearing a red parka I remembered vaguely from my childhood. I was not looking at the camera. I was looking off to my left, at something outside the frame. The date printed along the border said, July 1984. I would have been 9 years old in July of 1984. My mother had taken me on a camping trip that summer to visit her cousin in Cross Lake, which is a community north of Norway House, which is in the general direction of the valley we had just hunted, though I could not have told you at 9 years old that I had been anywhere near it. I looked at that photograph for a long time. I turned it over. On the back, in Ray's handwriting, in pencil, was one word. Shontun. That is all I want to tell you about the second thing I have not told anyone. I have told you what I found. I have not told you what I concluded, and I will not, because I do not have proof of my conclusion, and because the conclusion I have reached is one that changes everything I thought I understood about my mother's cousin in Cross Lake, and about the trip I took when I was 9, and about who exactly had shown me to the thing in the valley, and when, and why. I will only say this. Ray had known since I was 9 years old that I would be the one to walk out. He had known because whatever had happened in the summer of 1984 had already happened, and had already been recorded, and had already been filed away in a waxed paper envelope in an interior pocket of a chest bag that would be handed to me on a rock ridge north of Thompson 22 years later. The choice was not made in the blizzard. The choice was made when I was 9. My son is 9 years old this winter. He is asleep in the next room. He is a good boy. He is careful the way his mother is careful and stubborn, the way his Uncle Ray was stubborn, and he already asks me questions about the bush that I do not always know how to answer. He has a small .22 that I bought him for his birthday, and he keeps it clean, and he understands the rules of it. He has never been to Manitoba. His mother and I moved down to Ontario the year he was born. I told Lisa I wanted him to grow up somewhere warmer. That was the reason I gave her. It was not the whole reason. Last summer, I took him camping on a lake north of Kenora. We had a good week. On the last morning, I took a photograph of him at the edge of the campground, standing at the tree line, waiting for me to pack the canoe. He was looking off to his left, at something in the trees. When I got the photograph developed, I saw what he had been looking at. I have not shown that photograph to anyone. It is in the box with the notebook and the watch and the two 1984 pictures, the color one Ray left me, and a second one I have since found in my mother's things, taken the same summer, from a different angle, showing the same tree line and the same shape in it, and my 9-year-old self looking directly at it with an expression on my face that I do not remember making. My mother is dead now. She died 3 years ago. I do not think she knew what she was doing. I want to believe she did not know. That is one of the things I have chosen to believe without proof, because a man cannot carry every truth at once, and he gets to choose which ones he sets down. Ray asked me, in the letter, to look for what my great-grandfather buried. I have not looked. I have not looked because I have a boy who is 9 years old, and because looking would require going back into that valley, and because I'm afraid that going back into that valley would be understood by whatever lives there as the delivery of the next installment. I'm afraid, in other words, that the arrangement does not care whether I go in as a hunter or as an archaeologist. I am afraid it counts the same either way. But I am 50, and my father figure asked me to try, and my son is 9, which is the age I was when I was shown, and which is the age at which, if the pattern holds, and I cannot promise you the pattern will not hold, someone will try to show him too. I have not decided what I am going to do. I have decided one thing, which is that I am telling this story now, because if I do not come home from whatever I decide to do next, I want there to be a record. I want somebody, somewhere, to know that there is a valley about 40 kilometers northeast of Thompson, Manitoba, on the north end of a lake bent like an elbow, with a granite ridge on the west shore, and that there is a cabin on that lake and a wall tent on the ridge above it that has probably fallen down by now, and that under the ground somewhere in that valley there is something that 3 men brought in from the south in 1927, and that a 4th man is alive today because he did not fire his rifle in a whiteout in 2003, and because a creature that knew his uncle's habits and wore his uncle's blood on its jaw pressed its forehead to his and let him walk out. I said at the beginning that there were 3 things I had never told anyone. I have told you 2 of them. The first was why I did not fire. The second was what I said to the creature about Marcus. The third one I am not going to tell you, because it is not mine to tell yet. It has to do with what I have decided about my son, and about the summer of 1984, and about who in my family was and was not in on the arrangement, and about the 3rd photograph in Ray's oilcloth bundle from 1927 that I have not opened. I will open the 1927 photograph the night before I go back in. I have not decided when that will be, but I have started cleaning Ray's rifle. It has been in the closet for 22 years. It is a Remington 700, the same one my grandfather carried in a different form in 1958, and Ray carried in 1979, and I carried in 2003. It is old, but it is good. It shoots true. I ran a patch through it last week, and the bore was clean. I sat on the edge of the bed with it across my knees for a long time, and I thought about the boy in the next room, and about Lisa, who does not know any of this, and who I owe an explanation that I do not yet know how to give. I thought about what Ray said about the thing being as tired as we are. I thought about the forehead against my forehead in the storm. I thought about how it walked away from me, not ran, walked, like a man who had done a hard thing and was going home to rest. And I thought, and I want to leave you with this thought, because it is the closest thing I have to an answer for the question you started this story with, which is why I did not fire. I thought that maybe what I recognized in that face, in that whiteout, was not a relative. Maybe it was not a Delacroix man who had gone into the valley in some past November and never come out. Maybe it was something older and simpler than that. Maybe what I recognized was a thing that had been waiting 100 years for someone in my family to look at it and see it instead of shoot it. Maybe the arrangement is not that it takes. Maybe the arrangement is that it waits. I do not know. I have not been back. I have not decided. But my boy is 9, and the winter is coming, and there is a rifle on the bed beside me, and a photograph in a box in the closet, and a letter in my chest pocket that I have read so many times the creases have worn through the paper. And somewhere north of Thompson, there is a valley with a lake bent like an elbow, and something in it that I think, now, may not have been my enemy. I said I would try to tell you tonight. I have tried. I do not know yet what comes next. But if you are reading this, and you are a hunter, and you are thinking of flying into a lake northeast of Thompson this November, Lees, don't. It is not your debt. Let it be mine. Jake Delacroix, Northern Ontario, winter, 2025.